Hello and welcome to Radical Engagements here at Varnblog. And we're going to be talking today about a little piece over at Real Progressives called Obamacare and the Science of Prolonged Decay, because I wanted to get into uh, some of the failures of progressivism in the last um, 15 years, particularly progressivism as understood in the kind of wonk, what I like to call the wonkotopia. That's an analytic I kind of came up with a few other people in 2015 and kind of dropped it and picking back up. The wonkotopia view of like tinkering towards progressivism. So even a more like slow, almost Burkean conservative progressivism where you are constantly just enabling people to make better choices, et cetera, and stuff like that. Something that was very copacetic with neoliberalism, um, in that it created markets and government-sponsored markets, but didn't really, uh, and like would superficially take care of problems, particularly legal problems that were, kind of particularly onerous. If you're like me and remember pre-existing conditions and the weird rules around that prior to Obamacare, it was kind of nightmarish, proving that sometimes this was covered by other people, but otherwise you couldn't get it covered, and blah 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 blah. But I've always been a critic of Obamacare. Romneycare is slightly better than Obamacare in Massachusetts. It's actually funny because um, Obamacare and Romneycare, like the Romneycare version, is actually significantly shittier. I mean, not the Romneycare. The Obamacare version is actually significantly shittier than what the Republican plan that was implemented in Massachusetts actually was. But none of this is actually super helpful. So we're going to pick up Karen's piece. Karen Caligiuri, I believe is how you say her name. And we're going to get into it a little bit. She's writing for Progressives, which is a kind of more radical end of MMT kind of spectrum. So let's get into this today. For 2 summers in a row, squash bugs and vine burrows have decimated my zucchini. Asterisk is Vine talking. Karen, I feel you. They decimated mine too. Anyway, this year I've tried to delay the inevitable. I grew squash from heirloom seeds, lovingly planted in fertilized mounds of soil surrounded by dill, nasturtium, and other plants that attract wasps known to prey on gray squash-loving insects. Yeah, I also surrounded my squash with dichotomous earth, but that was just me. I watered them daily and watched with eager anticipation as the vines flourished and the bees darted in and out of the yellow sun blossom. As an asterisk, this is good writing. Anyway, back to the text. I'm so used to Marxist or even radical theoretical writing being just kind of frankly bad. Are like picking up the worst habits of French, are German translations into English and like normalizing them. So reading something that's like decent is pretty good. All right, anyway. But in the end, it didn't matter. My soil still harbored the infestation from the previous year. By late June, the squash bugs had begun rotting and laying triangles of copper-colored eggs on the downside of their leaves, while the bound burrows began chewing frash-ridden holes in the roots and stems. As a side note, if you want to deal with squash bugs, you really have to solar stellarize your soil, which means pump, like letting it lay fallow for a year, covering it with something dark, and letting it pump the heat into the layers of the soil to use nature to neutralize it without totally killing everything deep in your soil. But it's hard because one of the reasons why is there squash bugs still in the soil? Well, it's because there's eggs still in the soil. Gardening lesson from Varn. I know you didn't come here today. You came here for political analysis, so we'll go back to the political analysis. Okay. For a while, I postponed the devastation with pruning and vigilance, but as I pruned away the rotted branches, I remember an essay I read more than a decade ago. Written in 1959 by the late Professor Charles Lindbaum, The Science of Muddling Through articulated 2 distinct approaches to developing policy, the rational comprehensive model, which Limbaugh called the root method, and the successive limited comparison model, which he christened the branch method, which I would probably, this is what I'm talking, I would probably call that the Klug method. All right. As moniker suggests, the root model involves revolutionary change, what Limbaugh describes as starting from fundamentals anew each time, prepared to start completely from the ground up. In the contrast, the branch method involves, quote, continually building out from the current situation step by step and by small degrees. Limbaugh concluded with an endorsement of the second method, which became known as incrementalism, which really honestly goes all the way back to Berkey and conservatism. Now, I want to talk about this because I do think like Limbaugh is coming from it's writing in specifically in 1959, so it's coming out of an anti-communist context. But there is a way in which like you can't actually start at the root method every time on everything, and no one does. Like even radicals pick something they want to root out and start with the one vector first, and they might want to change all of society, but they don't try to change all of society all at once all the time. I mean, well, some anarchists do, but in general, most people do not try to do that because the amount of energy we're created to rebuild a totality like that is more than most people can muster. All right. As my garden decayed, I continued to think of Limbaugh's essay. Despite my effort, despite the time I spent flicking, wriggling the bodies into cups of soapy water or squirting bacterial insecticide into the exposed hollow stems, by early August, the fruit had shriveled, sucked dry by the parasite's thirst. Just like last year, my plants were so deteriorated that the slightest jiggle pulled the whole rotted mess out of the ground, roots and all. It's a good way to set up an analogy, but always remember that analogies are rhetorical arguments. And while you can't get away from them in science, you always have to have models. You have to be careful with them. All right. A system subdrive by parasites. I read Limbaugh's essay in 2010. In the aftermath of the financial crisis and right after President Obama passed the supposedly landmark Affordable Care Act, the ACA. From the get-go, even as a candidate, Obama's promises for healthcare reform were modest and nothing like the revolution supporters and detractors claimed it was. I said this at the time. I said they were so modest that they weren't going to even have cost controls in them, which means that a lot of the problems that people had with healthcare wasn't going to change. And I said that in 2009, before I was even that radical. Although Obama's coming to power was, for me, the capstone of my radicalization. And I remember it being really frustrating to me because everyone accused me of being a secret racist since it was Obama that pushed me over. But I have been an Obama canvasser off of the idea of the implied anti-racism in his campaign. And when I felt betrayed by that, by him picking basically all the ghouls of the Carter and Clinton administrations to be in his cabinet before we even got in, as early as 2008, I felt like I had been fooled again. The hope and change that we could believe in was really not change at all. We might as well have just had Hillary Clinton. But anyway, back to the text. Essentially, the Obama plan pantomimed the private market reforms of the 2006 Massachusetts Health Care Bill implemented by then Governor Mitt Romney. Absolutely. And this is discussed in detail and well in Philip Moralski's book on the neoliberal crises in the end of the aughts. So check those out. All right. During the first decade of the century, the drive for profits had riddled the entire American healthcare system with rot. Yeah, they had. I would also say our piecemeal reforms and relying on fixing them in a corporatist framework in Fordism. So handling social welfare by turning it largely over to corporations and tax incentives to maintain a public-private partnership in Fordism led to neoliberalism, where this could be used as a tightening mechanism and a labor discipline mechanism once you kick labor off the table. But there was always there from the beginning. Anyway, back to the text. While today's public-private partnerships remain demonstrably bad, resulting in more than 7 million uninsured Americans with a lower life expectancy and a higher cost per capita than any other wealthy nation, and actually even some unwealthy nations do better than us. The pre-Obamacare system was even worse, especially for those with pre-existing conditions. That's absolutely true. I had trouble getting my stuff covered even when I had insurance in the early aughts because I had fallen off my parents' insurance, and because I was a college student, had not been able to get immediately on good insurance, and because of that, some things just weren't covered, even because I was born with them. Yeah, it sucked. Anyway, previously, insurers often discriminated against people who were already sick. I mean, that's part of the nature of insurance. That's why health insurance isn't insurance. It should like we shouldn't think of it as insurance. It doesn't work the same way as insurance, even though it is bundled risk management. Um, this is why I'm trying to explain the economics of this, because insurance doesn't works because you can invest money off of the fact that a lot of people aren't going to need it, but in healthcare you will eventually need it, and it distorts cost structures. All right. Insured Americans for chronic diseases like diabetes, asthma, arterial fibrillation, leading to constant fear of letting their insurance lapse, are not, yeah. For future insurers could legally refuse to cover insulin inhalers or beta blockers they needed to survive. Insurers even had a right to drop newly diagnosed insurers from their plans or impose caps on their coverage, eh, inflicting sudden financial catastrophe on people at their most vulnerable. And even worse, after Biden and the Republican sided with the Republicans on the bankruptcy reform bill, you could no longer declare bankruptcy on medical debt. Yeah, the Democrats were behind that, by the way. All right. In a 2009 speech to Congress, Obama recounted several egregious examples of insurers denying coverage. One man from Illinois lost his coverage in the middle of a chemotherapy because the insurer found that he hadn't reported gallstones that he didn't even know about. They delayed his treatment and he died because of it. Another woman from Texas was about to get a double mastectomy when her insurance company canceled her policy because she forgot to declare a cause of acne. By the time she had insurance reinstated, her breast cancer had more than doubled in size. Yes, I remember stuff like that all the time in the aughts. Despite acknowledging the evils of for-profit healthcare, the Obama's reforms amounted to nothing more than pruning a rotted system. In 2010, the PBS Frontline documentary Obama's Deal recounted the political maneuvers that brought about the Affordable Care Act. Yeah, I always thought the Affordable Care Act was negotiated horribly because it started off hyper compromised and only became more and more so. Anyway, with the dramatic black and white stills of Obama's furrowed brow interspersed with the majority, interspersed with sober music and voiceovers of pragmatic Washington insiders like former Majority Leader Tom Daschle, the documentary suggested that Obama's 60-vote Senate majority, as well as the Democratic control of the House, was not enough to pass reform without the support of insurance lobbyists, particularly Karen Caligiuri, the president of America's Healthcare Insurance Plan, the chief lobbying group of the American healthcare insurance industry. Asterisk. And I was going to say this, yeah, which always told me a whole lot because a 60-vote Senate majority, having the House, and having a fairly sympathetic Supreme Court in 2008 was the most power an individual party had since the Eisenhower administration, maybe the Kennedy administration. It had been a long time. And yet they made it sound like they were at the beck and call of the Republicans, and what they were actually at is the beck and call of their funders, which made me realize that there was not going to be a way to reform this merely by voting in Democrats with nominally better ideas, because you had to also change their funding structure, and there's been no incentive for that to happen. All right, this is why I'm ending that conversation. The lobbyist infestation resulted in two of the worst aspects of Obama's healthcare reform: the mandate that all Americans be required to buy health insurance. I thought the Supreme Court was going to strike that down. Actually, they didn't. Thank you, John Roberts. Because I thought it should have been funded by taxes, because the tax, the ability for the government to tax on that is well established, whereas the ability to enforce the mandate of buying at the federal level is not. But nonetheless, Roberts sided with the Obama administration, although putting some poison pills into the program. Anyway, with the failure to deliver that promised public option, which would have allowed Americans to seek coverage outside of the exploited market system, Oh, it would still be a market system. It would just be a counterforce that would have drive competition with a collective buyer, which would have driven down prices. I mean, so I still, it's not really outside of the exploitive market system. It's just that there'd be one massive buyer that could push prices down. During the negotiations, Wendell Porter, a former Cigna executive turned whistleblower, characterized the lobbyist role in developing what became known as Obamacare. The industry knew that it was going to be under attack, and they wanted to make sure that they got a requirement that all of us buy health insurance. They wanted to make sure that we were all forced to buy products from them, and they wanted to make sure that there's no alternative other than the private insurance market, which is why they so adamantly opposed the public option, and why a lot of Democrats get on board with them on it, including like the New York Times. All right, that's foreign talking. Rather than using a 60-vote majority to enact meaningful change, I don't know that he could. I do want to talk about this. Like, now we can talk about how there's like a Christian cinema and a Joe Manchin, but there's like 10 Joe Manchins in the 60 um in the 60 vote Senate majority. What it illustrates is that the Democrats were never a cohesive party, even though they're in some ways more cohesive than the Republicans, and that they stand more loose from the right from the left because there's no place for the left to go in American politics, which is why the Popular Front has ended up being a terrible, terrible thing. But I've talked about this a million times, so let's just continue here. Obama pruned a couple of rotting branches and planted seeds that would eventually bloom into future profits for insurance. Yeah, that's why the insurance didn't oppose him that much. He did all this under the direction of the same parasites who'd already sucked the system dry. Absolutely. In reference to the bill, the Democratic chair, Howard Dean, admitted the insurance companies literally did write it, which is what they normally do these days. A system designed to fail. Even though the ACA implemented some marginal reforms, like prohibitions against dropping coverage for pre-existing conditions and the requirements to cover preventative care, sometimes, the American healthcare system remains a failure. Dr. Margaret Flowers, a pediatrician and healthcare activist, predicted this failure in a 2010 interview with Bill Maher. As for weeks before Flowers' interview with Maher, President Obama outlined his proposed healthcare bill and issued a challenge to the American public. If anyone from either party has a better approach that will bring down premiums, bring down the deficit, cover the uninsured, strengthen Medicare for seniors, and stop insurance companies from abuses, let me know. I'm eager to see it. Yeah, that was bullshit. Anyway, back to the thing. The next morning, Dr. Margaret Flowers accepted the challenge, appearing in the White House gate with a letter explaining how implementing a national single-payer healthcare system, which is what most capitalist countries have, it's not even a socialist thing. That's foreign talking. Would both save lives and address the president's fiscal concern by saving billions of dollars a year in healthcare spending, both by the government. We spend so much as a government on this stuff, um, due to the way we bill out, and by individuals. She was turned away. She and her colleague, Dr. Carol Paris, tried again the next day, appearing to Obama in Baltimore, letter in hand. This time they were arrested. Yeah, fuck Democrats. Anyway, Moyers asked her if she could have said to the president that she'd been allowed to speak with him. Quote, I would have told him that the American people were expecting more from him, she said. That there'd been such a huge amount of suffering in this country and preventable death, and that this is completely unacceptable. As a doctor who had personally witnessed how the insurance industry had harmed her patients by denying coverage for life-saving medicines to forcing her to send patients home before they were well, she knew that the plan was designed by the bloodsuckers was going to draw more blood. We knew that every year we're passing was designed to fail, and if it passed, it would take years for people to realize. Look at the number of people who are dying in this country every year, and you say, okay, we're going to wait 4 or 5 years to see whether or not this works or not. Then you already know from a health policy statement that's not going to work. It's going to make many people going to be lost during that period. Yeah, it was rolled out so that people wouldn't see all the effects. One of the things that I will say, it actually did insurance a little shittier because insurance companies wouldn't cover what they weren't mandated to cover by Obamacare. You would also get taxed for it as a means for paying for this. You know, the whole Cadillac plan thing was equalizing in a negative sense. Um, and my insurance, other than the caveats about shit like um dropping people with pre-existing conditions, which was a nightmare that I lived with. Uh, my insurance in some ways is crappier now than it was in 2009. At least what is available to me as a public school teacher. I have some advantages that I'm not going to go into that I get around that because of the my partnership. But and teachers are supposed to have good insurance. Yeah. All right. Unfortunately, Flower's predictions of failure were right. Last year, the CDC reported that the U.S. life expectancy had dropped to the lowest level in 2 decades. The average American lifespan of 76.1 years. Recent study has shown the COVID-19 pandemic caused a worldwide drop in life expectancy, but in comparison to 29 other industrial nations, the United States decline have been worse. Only in Slovakia and Bulgaria have there been more cuts from the average lifespan than the United States. The Commonwealth Fund took a step further and analyzed pre-pandemic deaths from avoidable mortality, which they defined as deaths that could have been prevented with appropriate health care. Their analysis found that states like Mississippi and West Virginia have more avoidable deaths than any other industrialized nation, including Mexico and Latvia. Yeah, Mexico's system is better than ours. And they have better outcomes. And that's despite cartel wars. Anyway, West Virginia was the worst. Thank you, Joe Manchin, with 416 avoidable deaths for every 100,000 people. That, by the way, is 3 times higher than the worst murder rate in the world in war zones. Just want to put that out there. Roughly the equivalent of the number of deaths caused when a 747 jet crashes. Thus, with a population of 1.7 million, Virginia's lack of health care killed the same number of people as 17 jet crashes in 2018 and 2019. Even Minnesota, a state with the fewest preventable deaths, still had a higher avoidable mortality than most of the industrialized nations, including Greece and Slovenia. I don't know what Greece and Slovenia did to you, Karen. But anyway, what Obama's efforts to keep what works and for the ownership class? Yes. Dr. Flowers predicted Obama's incremental pruning of the for-profit system had catastrophically failed. And it was obviously, I just want to say, it was obviously going to do so. And like I said this before it even passed. As she noted in the 2009 letter, if Obama had truly wanted to build a successful healthcare policy on the foundation of an existing model, he could have simply improved and expanded the government-funded Medicare program, which is not very good. I actually think the love of Medicare because of its popularity is just because everything else is bad. But yes, we could have improved and expanded Medicare and also changed the way we bill for it because we bill for it in ways that promote some stupid things. Don't want to get into that here. It's beyond the scope of this essay, but socialized medicine is not actually Medicare for all or even a single payer system. But both would be better than what we got. And you will notice that as soon as the Democrats got in power, we quit talking about it. The DSA is doing whatever now. And I'm going to say that because I don't even think these are socialist reforms. These are reforms just to make capitalism work. Like the Fordist way we currently do this is expensive for everybody, corporations, governments, and individuals. The only people who benefit from it is an industry that is basically a financial industry parasitic on everything. All right. Flowers wrote, you said you wanted to keep what works, and that would be Medicare. Medicare is an American legacy that we can feel proud. I don't think so. I think it's something that it's not terrible. It has guaranteed health security to all who have it. Medicare has lifted seniors out of poverty. Health disparities, which are rising for the nation, began to disappear as soon as patients reach 65 years of age. Not anymore, they don't. And patients keep doctors prefer Medicare over private insurance. Yeah, I want to say this though, because the stats that she's citing above actually indicates that it's not true that it eliminates the health disparities, but it is better. The problem is that they would probably underfund Medicare the same way they underfund the stuff in the states. They underfund national health care in Canada, which is to like underfund them at so the provincial level has to pick it up where there's not currency sovereignty, and thus there's stuff like to discipline national insurance in ways that helps non-national providers. And even in a country like Canada, which has a much better system than the US, you can see this being done, even by the Liberal Party under Trudeau. So I think we should be careful with this. Anyway, this proposal should have appealed to Obama's incrementalist instincts, but the president likely knew already that expanding and improving government program may seem incremental. The thought of expanding the program to all would have seemed like a huge paradigm shift. Yeah, the funny thing is, it's still incrementalist. It's not even, as I'm pointing out, it's not even a root fix. It's not. All right. This is primarily because most Americans below 65 rely on their employer for health insurance. Yep. This is one thing to provide government-funded care to those who are elderly or disabled. It's another for those who are falling out of the labor market's grip. But if so healthcare were available to all Americans, regardless of employment status, large employers would lose their ability to hold health benefits hostage during contract negotiations. Absolutely. And it would also actually, it would weaken some unions who use this to their advantage too, which is why there's some guild-esque unions that will actually fight public healthcare so that they can continue delivering this as part of their benefits, right? So they don't have to negotiate harder on other things or cooperate with other unions. I will say the UAW right now is finally going in the opposite direction, and that's a good thing. All right. In the current American system, the one Obama upheld, the ownership class, but that we mean rentiers, really. I mean, the ownership class, why don't you just say capitalist because you don't want to be Marxist? Come on. You can always use the universalist need as a bargain because we're talking about rentier bourgeoisie. I guess it is a subset of the bourgeoisie, but still. You can always use its universal need as a bargaining chip. Yep. And larger labor struggles for living wages and workers' rights. Yes, it is. They do that. A recent Status Quo News interview epitomized how large corporations like Ford, GM, Stellantis gain competitive advantage over other employers by offering human rights as a benefit. We have the liberal human rights discourse here. I'm not going to get into that. I still mostly agree with this. I just don't like talking about stuff in terms of human rights. On day 3 of the United Auto Workers strike, reporter Jordin Cheriton spoke with Josh, a UAW member who makes $19 an hour. Due to the industry's tiered wage system, he cannot afford to move out of his parents' home. Here, Dross addresses the most repeated question: if you aren't happy, why not you get another job? I can't go to another job. This is one of the few jobs that you still gives you health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance. Yeah, I don't even get good dental as a teacher. Anyway, back to the thing. This is like the only job that still has those kinds of benefits, whereas anywhere else you go, they don't want to even give you health insurance. So a lot of us are here for the benefits and kind of sticking around for those benefits, but at the same time, we wish we were being paid the same as senior people. Yeah. And also, like, it doesn't make sense to pretend that you can market your way out of this. And this is in a tight labor market. By that, I mean, like, labor has a lot of power right now, and they're still getting stuck with this stuff. Even a plan as incremental as expanding and improving the existing Medicare program could produce a seismic societal change if it meant upending the current employer-based system. Yes, although we should be more radical than that. We should get to the root. Rather than fighting against the erosion of their human rights to medical care, unions supporting people like Josh could spend more time focused on living wages, equitable pay, and more humane working conditions. Absolutely. They could do that even more if they were larger and in larger sectors, and we did something about Taft-Hartley. All right, that's just me. Moving to a universal government-funded healthcare program would essentially mean ripping out our current market-based system, roots and all, and replacing it with one of the well-being of all citizens that's not contingent on employment. Don't underestimate their ability to screw that up, my friend, but otherwise, yes. But such a shift was more than what President Obama and his corporate allies wanted. In a 29 blog post, journalist David Sirota charitably characterized the president as afraid of being attacked by moneyed interests that enjoyed the status quo. Whether Obama's aversion to single payer was a result of fear or something more calculating, his incremental market-based reform has resulted in mass suffering and loss of life. As Dr. Flowers foretold, the legacy of Obamacare, a policy plan in the soil parasite-ridden industry, was born shriveled, unpalatable fruit. Good use of a metaphor. Also true. All right. Eradicating the parasitic drive for profit from our basic needs. One of the things that bugs me about the MNT frameworks of this is they kind of don't see the fundamental. I mean, they kind of do see the fundamental problems here and then back away from it and think this is mostly something that you can fix piecemeal. And that's because they think that governments are enclosed systems and economies are enclosed within governmental systems. And I don't think that's true. All right. But I agree with most of this essay. I don't want to come in hard on it. I just think like the idea that this is just from parasites and not a fundamental contradiction of capitalism because of the need to control labor, that's really what's going on. All right. I feel like this still is kind of I agree with 99% of it, but there's like a final step it needs to take that I don't think it's going to take. Like policymakers, gardeners struggle to learn from past mistakes. Yes, they do. This August, after insects killed the last of my zucchini, they turned their thirst to my cucumbers, and within a couple weeks, no members of the cucumber family survived the Squassberg apocalypse. Charles Lindholm's love of incremental change did not account for the apocalypse as a reward for members, a developing policy within a corrupt and parasitic framework. Lindholm was writing in an anti-communist frame. He was an anti-communist progressive. That's part of your problem. Anyway, that's Varn talking. Get back to text. Americans face numerous existential crises, from mega droughts and wildfires to ballooning household debt and homelessness. We always have ballooning household debt. And at the beating heart of all the calamities lies capitalism, yes, which excuses any nominal desire for well-being of people in favor of drive for profit. Okay, we are going there. Good. Power to you, Karen. A system that prioritizes human health has led to what economic anthropologist Jason Henkel has dubbed the ecological and social double crisis. Only two crises? We got more crises than that, which he argues was caused by the structure of the capitalist system of production. Americans can no longer afford to let this profit-driven model supply basic needs like healthcare. They can't afford to let it supply other needs too, honestly. But because it's going to eat up the environment, even if you limited it selectively in places like healthcare. But in healthcare, there's clear market failure, even from a capitalist standpoint. That's what I'm talking. Throughout the American healthcare system marches on an army of service reps, actuaries, business analysts, software engineers, market specialists, and others to make a living from this industry, even though they lack knowledge or skills to diagnose or heal sick people. Oh yeah, actually, there's whole swaths of medical. This is actually a problem for the U.S. If you socialize medicine, you have to deal with all these people, and I don't just mean I'm not just talking about the insurance people who exist to klug this system in a way that works and as kind of a backdoor, massive, shitty public works project. Beyond those employed directly by the health insurance industry, with the additional armies of HR journalists, coding specialists, bill reviewers, and all those whose job interact with this industry. The Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that nearly 2 million jobs will be lost due to transition to a more just and equitable single-payer healthcare system. Part of why it's hard to do. And it's that way because we've allowed it to develop that way, because we allowed it to klug for so long. As a monetarily sovereign nation with its debt denominated in its own fiat currency, I knew that they were going to do this. The United States has a physical capacity to fully fund the national single-payer system. Yes, it does. But a single-payer, it would actually be cheaper, even if you don't assume MMT conditions. But a single-payer system alone would not address the widespread job losses, certain onslaught of demand that will occur when all Americans have access to publicly funded healthcare. Karen, I actually thank you for talking about this, because I remember in the days of the Sanders campaign, they were talking about like building universal triage services and stuff, and me going like, that's good, but you need to be more honest about what the problem is here. Modern American healthcare is built on the labor of people whose job it is should not exist and whose working lives have no social value outside of the money they help earn for shareholders and executives in the insurance industry. Yeah, this is the true nature of dead-end jobs. It's not that they're not needed. They are socially necessary for capitalists. They're just draining on everyone who does them and society as a whole. All right. A new healthcare system cannot germinate in the soil of a for-profit model. Over 2 million people who are currently employed in those jobs will be rendered mute by a transition to public funding, and where we already suffer from a growing scarcity of workers to train to heal and care for the sick. Yeah. Think about how many people that we could be training as nurses that we're currently training as like admin techs. For years now, that the U.S. has been funneling its educated workforce into careers that would not exist if it were not for capitalist imperative lives. Yeah, I would say neoliberal imperatives, but I like to use in capitalist instead of neoliberal because it lets you. This actually lays the blame. I like this article more now. It's going where it needs to go. The financial basic needs like medical care. Modern American healthcare is built on the labor of people who should not exist, whose working lives are no. I've already read that. For that reason, incremental and improvement and expansion of Medicare cannot by itself solve a healthcare crisis. Correct, Karen. You are correct. Absolutely. Rather, we need a more robust, ground-up approach that will simulate for healthcare as a universal basic service while providing society useful career paths for those displaced by insurance and financial sectors. And that takes build-up to do, which we need to start thinking about. As economists like Fatal Kabub have suggested, a push towards universal system must include a federal jobs guarantee, which would provide local jobs with community-determined value, irresponsive of their ability to produce profit. Ironically, the MMTers are actually kind of close to old school Marxist plans about universal labor workhouses and the empowering that we give to labor to deal with negotiations and eventually overpower and remove the bourgeoisie entirely. But that's also why they won't do it. That's why you can't reform your way to this. I mean, that's the fundamental class antagonism, right? That's why you can't just pretend that we can just ask for this because they're never going to do it. At the same time, we cannot meet our nation's growing healthcare demands by the current medical workforce, which continues to dwindle due to burnout, retirement, and a lack of education funding and resources. Absolutely. Our current system burdens future doctors, nurses, dentists, and psychiatrists with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, making it impractical and unprofitable for young medical professionals to serve in lower paying, undeserved communities like inner cities or rural towns. Free public college and an increased investment in nursing and medical school would be another vital prerequisite for implementing a new national healthcare program. I would go further than this, actually, more than free public college. Um, I don't know why. I don't know why you can't start studying medical directly out of high school instead of having to go through like, yeah. Some of our, I love liberal arts education, but I actually don't think it's needed for nurses. Of course, if we were to dig through each layer of a policy garden, we would find another stratum contaminated by urge for profit from societal need. For this reason, organizations like March for Medicare for All have outlined a list of additional services would accompany a holistic approach to healthcare, including safe and reliable transportation, substance use treatment, and caregiving. Why don't we just call for socialism and not stop piecemealing this shit? Anyway, just want to be honest about that. But I agree. I just want to say that we should just call a spade a spade. It's not hard to imagine how a federal jobs guarantee could replace the current army of insurance workers with a new army ready to drive patients to its appointments, counsel people with addictions, or care special needs. Yeah, but it is easy to imagine how the same people who you are empowering to give that federal jobs guarantee are going to lord it over people and use it in the same corrupt way unless you also empower the workers to control it. So the federal jobs guarantee is not enough. This is my problem with MNTs. They're almost there all the time, but they kind of just see governments as morally neutral and not power organizations in and of themselves, which even classical Marxists were clear on. I mean, Lenin's clear on this. Why would people with this much power have the incentive to pay nice? Just because you ask them to? I'm totally with you on what we need. But the federal jobs guarantee needs to empower the workers to control that guarantee. Otherwise, it can be used to recreate bad systems themselves. You can't, people don't give this stuff to you out of the goodness of their heart and out of goodness of collective social need. It is easy to imagine creating a highly compensated jobs with the goal of providing community value rather than corporate profit, which would vastly improve our collective well-being. Yes, it is very easy to imagine that. And I totally agree with you. However, how are you going to ensure it? Well, worker control of this issue would be how you ensure it. So we need a federal jobs guarantee and worker control of the federal government. All right. That's all. In 1959, Charles Lindbaum, I'm actually looking him up to make sure that I'm right about him, could not envision a prolonged suffering caused by incremental tweaking of policies rooted in corruption and decay. The future healthcare reform fostered by the blight of the capitalist model reveals how incrementalism could solve the most formal ecological and social crises of our day. We must root out the parasitic thirst for profit from all basic human needs. Yes, we also need to deal with the power relations to justify it. Only a ground-up revolution that includes the federal job guarantee and fully funded universal basic services, including healthcare and education, root out the infestation that President Obama allowed to fester. Absolutely, but the only way you're going to get that is for us to control the government, because otherwise it will be used to empower other people in similar ways. So everything you say is necessary, everything you say is good is not sufficient. That is my challenge to MNTers, and that's one of the main challenges to MNTers. There's the other, which is like, I want to see how you're going to do your international program without imperialism. Counter-imperialism, still imperialism, but nonetheless. All right. So let's look at this Charles Lindbaum character. American academic who studied economics at University of Chicago and was Sterling Professor Emeritus of Political Science and Economics at Yale. Ooh, yeah. He served as the American Political Science Association and the American Comparative Economic Studies, as well as directors of Yale's Institute for Social Policy and Economic Studies. Lindbaum was one of the early advocates of the theory of incrementalism and policymaking. He's basically the proto-Cass Sunstein. The muddling through are the Echternach theory, dancing process, Roman Catholic dancing procession. Okay. That policy changes in most circumstances, evolutionary, revolutionary. So liberal Bernsteinism. He came to view through the existence of studies in welfare and trade unions through the industrialized world. Yeah, so this is progressive. This is anti-communist progressivism. Together with his fellow Yale professor Robert Dahl, he was the champion of polyarchy, a pluralistic view of political elites and governments in the 1950s. Polyarchy. Now, this is an interesting thing. In a time of peaceful competition and compromise between elites and politics and marketplace drives free market and allows it to thrive. Yes, this guy is Proto-Cass Sunstein. He's one of the founders of Longtopia. Thank you, Karen. You found someone important for me to read and critique. I want to endorse this. 90% good, 10% insufficient on the Caligiuri. And it's like, well written and enjoyable and correct, but you got to have worker control of the government to get a jobs guarantee that's not going to be exploited against workers. You can't just ask the Lord to be nice. That Bonapartist notion just doesn't usually hold up. Sorry. But everything else you said was correct. And it's way better than most of what I see passes in progressive world. So more power to you. And I hope you guys learned something.